Do you like what you hear? Then you need a Devon bass. Devon bass. Better by design. Whether you're old school or whether you're new school, we discuss it all for the only one that matters. Christian Talk with Christian musicians. Welcome to another episode of For the Only One That Matters, Christian Talk with Christian musicians, and who knows what rabbit holes we'll dive down when chatting with each other. Today's guest is going to be Nico Lembo, an Atlanta area session player and gigging drummer, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy this discussion. Let's join our interview in progress. Well, you know what? This is kind of exciting for me because I'm actually getting a lot of feedback from a lot of different folks and about this podcast thing. Basically, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be interviewing folks like yourself, and I have a question or two to start the discussion. But where it goes from there, dude, you are under absolutely no freaking obligation to pay attention to any of the questions that I ask.
Okay.
So, it'll just be kind of a free flow stream of consciousness type thing. But my goal with all of this is just, I've been a musician for almost 50 years. And, God, that's right. Yeah. 51 years since I picked up my first instrument. Oh, Lord have mercy. And, but it's one of those things. I was talking to my son he's a music teacher. And I told him I wish I had his education. He says, "Dad, but you got something that most people don't have." And I said, "What's that?" He says, "You got mileage. Mileage counts."
Yes, very much so. Very much so.
Well, with that in mind, I'm just thinking, there's a million things that musicians need to talk to each other about. From the technical stuff to the philosophy of music, blah, blah. There's a million things that we can chat with about. And that's kind of where I want to go with this. What I had in mind with you was, I have the questions up here. What does a drummer expect from other members in the band when you're playing in a playing situation? What do you expect the bass player to do for you? What do you expect the drummer, or you're the drummer. What do you expect the guitar player or keyboard player, singer, that kind of thing? And I would be interested in your viewpoints is if there's any difference in skill sets that you bring to the table between a church gig and maybe a secular gig. Same skills or not the same? And what do you wish other musicians understood about you drummers? What do you wish we knew about you? And I got to tell you, the reason that you're on this, the reason that I wanted to interview you is that I enjoy playing with you. I'm a bassist, most folks know. And my biggest nightmare is a drummer who doesn't understand what the pocket is. And because the bass player, my viewpoint is the bass players and drummers dance with each other.
Absolutely.
Sometimes you lead, and we talk to each other through your kick. Your kick tells me what kind of pattern you're expecting me to play, or sometimes I'll play a pattern that tells you, no, this is kind of what I'm digging on the kick. And then you and I do that. We shift back and forth, and then you give me my sense of time comes from your backbeat. So. And it's from the first time I played with you, I'm thinking, I don't have a single thing to worry about, because I could just sit and focus on the music, because I got a pocket over here off to the right side of the stage, which is a mile wide and deep. And I, as a bass player, dude, you make my job easy. You make my job stinking easy.
That's great to hear. That's sort of what my goal is as a drummer. Is to kind of create the foundation. And, where everybody can sort of rely on where the timing and the pocket is. And I appreciate your warm comments. Those mean a lot to me. Those are things that I've worked on my whole life, and I continue to work on as a musician and as a drummer. But as a drummer, from a drumming standpoint, having the bass player lock in with me and being somebody that I can play with, not somebody necessarily where it's like the time is here and you play to that person, which I do that sometimes too. There are several bass players that I work with in town who sort of have a different philosophy of that, and they have their timing and you kind of play to them, and that's cool
What do
too.
you
I
mean?
can
The
do
bass
that.
player do you think the bass player thinks he drives the bus?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, we do. We do.
And
We do.
exactly. Well, so
But you know what?
now
But
this is where
that's
you
not entirely true because it's a tag team.
right. So it's different for everybody, based on what the roles are in the bands and just kind of where they've come from, and what their experiences are. I much prefer to play in situations where there is a sort of give and take with the bass player and the other
Mhm.
musicians on stage too, where it's not you're not necessarily sacrificing pocket or timing, but there is a little bit of leeway here, a little bit of push and pull, like what you said before. Sometimes, just talking about specific patterns that we play between the bass and the drums, there's kind of a cerebral thing that happens when you start playing a song. For example,
Right.
if you're playing a bass line that's very busy, I might kind of just sit back a bit and just play 1 and 3 on the kick and just stay out of your way. During bass solos, especially, I'm not going to be playing a lot of fills. I'm not going to be playing a lot of toms. Nothing that gets in the way of that sort of frequency. Um, when it comes to actual patterns, I think probably when I was younger, I was probably a little more apt to play busier. I think when we're younger, we just have a lot to say as musicians, and so we want to
Well,
say it all the
it's all
time.
about chops. You
Yeah,
got
exactly. Yeah, right.
and you got to have the fastest chops on the block. You're known by how
Exactly.
fast. When I was a younger bass player, uh, I was very busy, very
Yeah.
busy, and one of the drummers says, "Oh, you have happy hands." That's the politest way I've ever had that put. But
Yeah.
do you know that? Does the name Charlie Korch sound familiar to you?
Yes. Yes, it
All right,
does.
good friend of mine. I was with him in a
Awesome.
blues band for about a year and a half, the Rhythm Raiders, and
Okay.
I loved working with him because it got to the point where, as we got to know each other, I began to pick up on his idiosyncrasies. I began to pick up when he was setting up a fill, and I would know what kind of fill he was going to do. And like blues,
Right.
there's a lot of triplet stuff. You know, and that's drummies. And I know you talk drummies, but
Yeah. I'm fluent.
but it was all I would have to do is glance at him, and and I could see him, and I knew he was going to set up a fill, and I had a fill that would follow his toms around, for instance, when
Right.
he'd go around the set, and
Hmm.
it just made for such a freakishly tight rhythm section. Then the guitar player, Jim, he told us one day at rehearsal, he says, "I feel like I can do anything. Like I don't have to worry."
That's
He says, "I don't have to count 1, 2, 3, 4. I feel the
those are
pocket."
the best compliments. Those are honestly the best compliments that I can receive as a drummer. And furthermore, apart from that too, when I play in any kind of gig really where I'm not a main feature player, like when you're playing. So a bit of background on me. At first, I come more from the jazz background. I
Mhm.
was a jazz studies major at the University of North Florida. I'm from Florida originally, and I've been in Georgia. It'll be 10 years in January, which is crazy to think about because it doesn't seem like it's been that long really that I've been here, and in that time I've made a lot of really great connections and met a lot of really great people. But across the board, it's all about support and being supportive with the music you're playing, especially from like a jazz background. You had mentioned blues, and jazz and blues kind of go hand in hand in a lot of ways. Blues kind of or jazz kind of came from the blues back in the day. So and you also mentioned a local heavyweight, Charlie Korch. I've never met him personally, but I'm friends with him on Facebook. And his tales from the gig
Oh
quips
my God. I
are
mean,
just so like
if you ever get a chance to go watch him play, listen to him play, he has the lightest touch. His snare work, his ghost stroke. What do they call it? Ghost. where it's just
Ghost
like,
Notes, yeah.
yeah, Ghost Notes. He has, and he's a big guy, right? He's a big guy, and you
Yeah,
think
yeah, yeah.
he would be a gorilla on these things. Man,
Right.
he floats over these things, and he is, uh, he brooks no nonsense. So when somebody stupid comes up to him, dude, I think he's from New York or he's from Pennsylvania or New Jersey,
Okay. Oh,
and so
that actually makes a lot of sense.
because that attitude pops up. And, and
Right.
if he's your bud, he will charge hell with a bucket of water and a squirt gun for you. But man, you screw with him on a gig, dude.
Man, I mean,
Snark is his superpower.
that's our livelihood. We spend a lot of time as musicians, not just on the gig, but in the practice room, away from people, away from our loved ones and friends and family, trying to perfect our craft. I've been a musician for 20 plus years, and most of that time I've spent, in college and in school and lessons, and
Yep.
when I could have been hanging out with friends or uh, living a normal teenager's life. I was in my room practicing and studying and watching videos and just trying to be better at this one thing. I don't have, in my opinion, I don't have a lot of natural talent as it pertains to actually physically playing the drums. I feel like my natural talent comes more with my attitude and with my ears. I'm able to hear forms pretty well. And I can kind of understand where things start and stop. I can follow a melody pretty well. So those are things that I never really set out to learn. I just kind of I feel like I kind of came to the game with that already. But absolutely zero playing.
I saw.
I have no natural rhythm whatsoever. I'm a terrible dancer. I trip over myself all
Oh,
the
good
time.
Lord! Oh
Um,
man, to see me
so
dance is to see a horror movie. Yeah, I saw a really interesting. I saw a really interesting quote, a Michael Jordan quote. And when he was high school, getting ready to go, I guess he went to North Carolina. He's getting ready to go to North Carolina, and he was being scouted by a North Carolina coach. And the North Carolina coach saw him play and says, this kid could be one of the best players on
right.
the collegiate level. And and he was talking with Michael Jordan, and Michael told him, he says, I want to be the best player in college. And he says, and this coach says, well, you're going to have to work harder. He says, I'm
Hmm.
working as hard as anybody else in my team. He said, I'm sorry. I thought you said you wanted to be the best.
Yep.
Michael Jordan came back to him 2 days later and says, Coach, I want to apologize. From this moment on, nobody will work harder than I will. And that's
Hmm.
really, he had some natural talent, but dude, he he worked. He worked it.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
I'm that way. I know where I exist in the musical food chain. I'm okay. I'm a jack of all trades, master of none kind of guy. I mean, I'm pretty good at bass. I'm pretty good at guitar, and I'm totally okay with that because I'm earning a living doing it. And that's at the end of the day. Come on, it's this. It's some of
Yeah.
it anyway.
No,
And
no. I mean, and that's something that a lot of people, who we both know, we know people that either never took the plunge and learned how to play, or maybe just people that just play for fun and they just kind of mess around with it here and there. But they wish that they could do what we do on our worst day.
yep,
When I come to church on Sundays playing with you at Burnt Hickory. I usually running off of about 4 or 5 hours of sleep,
yeah, you.
because I had a
I'm watching you over there in the
I had a
chair in between services.
oh man, it's so hard. But it's something that I've done forever since I started really playing. You have to really hustle. And I think that's kind of what people don't see that, when they see us play at church in the morning, or they come see us at the bar or whatever. They don't see the amount of time that we put into not only learning the songs, but like learning how to play our actual instruments. There's so many times where you can be a good player, but you're not right for the gig. You're not playing the right kind of thing, or you don't have the right kind of sound, or maybe you don't have the right kind of attitude. I've been in that situation before.
Oh
um
Lord.
so
That's the worst. I'll take somebody whose chops are less than perhaps what's needed, but who shows up prepared, shows up, has a good attitude, and plays. put a prima donna in the room with me, dude, sparks are gonna fly. They just are.
Yeah, I
Ain't nobody
don't
got time for that.
I don't deal well with ego and with arrogance or anything like that. You know, there's no room for that in this industry. Some of my favorite people and players that I know on any instrument are the most humble people, and they'll be the first ones to tell you they start out by telling you what they have to work on, you know, or just things that they're not good at. Not, you know, unless you're Buddy Rich, who, for those of you who aren't drummers, Buddy Rich, in my opinion, there will never be a better drummer, like
Yes.
drummer. There will never be a better drummer than Buddy Rich. His technique, anyway, he's perfect. But if you're not that sort of like,
He's proof that aliens came to Earth and had children with humans.
I mean, if you don't, if you're a professional, like a professional, you know, he wasn't just kind of messing around on the drums. He was a professional player at 18 months.
Huh.
My daughter is 8 months right now, so she's got about 10 months to perfect drumming to be even close to being on Buddy Rich's level. So, you know, we're working really hard at that. I'm very excited about her progress right now. But like that, and you know, that's not to say that he didn't work. He worked his butt off his whole life,
He
you know.
did.
So if you're not that sort of like natural talent where you can just sit down and play, and I've met people that played in his band. The great trumpet player named Bill Prince, he teaches at or taught at the University of North Florida for a long time. He's since retired and lives in Jacksonville and plays everywhere. But if you check out the Buddy Rich record, Mercy, 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 Bill Prince
Yes.
is all the trumpet solos on that record.
I went to
And he
school
was
with a trombone player from his band, and
I mean,
he told me, he says, look, there's not a better musician on the planet, and there's not a bigger jackhat that ever lived.
yes,
Because
and that's exactly,
you were scared to death of him the entire time.
yep, that's pretty much what Bill Prince said. And he said that when they would rehearse the band, the guitar player in the band at the time played drums and could read music. So they would run the entire show with the guitar player playing the charts of the
Right.
tunes, with Buddy sitting out in the audience listening to it. And then Buddy would come up and play the entire show, like knew everything. And so that's not something that can be taught. You know,
No.
you can't teach that. You can't really learn that. You can learn how to play in a big band. Playing in a big band is a great time as a drummer. But if you don't have those sort of talents, which no one really does, then you're constantly working, you're constantly progressing, you're constantly trying to find something that you're not good at, you know. And
There's a story of a famous trumpet player, and I can't think of his name. But he was giving a lesson. He was 80. He was taking a lesson. Excuse me, taking a lesson. No, I'm sorry. He's giving a lesson, and he's like in his 80s. And at the end of his lesson, he asked his student. He said, "Would you like to come with me? I want you to introduce you to someone." So he said, "Okay, sure." So they drove over to another house, and they went in. And in the house was a 95-year-old man, trumpet player, who gave the 80-year-old trumpet teacher a lesson.
Yep.
And the student was absolutely flabbergasted. He says, "You've done everything there is to do in the music. I mean, you're at the top, you're the pinnacle. And when people mention trumpet, they think of you." He says, "Why are you taking lessons?" He says, "Oh, because I think I'm making progress."
Yeah, that, I mean, you hear some variation of that story with lots of people. The version that I heard was from my percussion teacher in college. Was a famous cellist. I forget his name. It wasn't Yo-Yo Ma, but someone like that. You know, it was kind of the same kind of thing. But it's so true, you know, and like the more situations you put yourself in, the more time that you spend playing, and the more that you kind of take yourself out of what you can already do. Like as a musician, if you're playing by yourself is very important. You know, Buddy's whole thing too, getting back to Buddy Rich, was practicing isn't as important as playing. And when you have as much natural talent as he had, you know, you can justify that. For somebody that doesn't have a whole lot of natural talent, you know, you put in a good hour or two a day on your own. And it doesn't matter how long you do it. You just have to do what you're not good at. You know, if you're constantly doing things, if you sound good while you're practicing, you're not practicing. You're just playing,
You're
which
playing.
is all. is also important. You know, if I have an hour to practice, which anymore I have 0 minutes to practice anymore, with a new baby in the house, which has been just really rocking my roll lately. But when I do have the time to actually sit down and work on something, I might spend, 5 or 10 minutes just kind of messing around, kind of clearing the cobwebs is what I call it, and just
Mhm.
like not even really playing anything. Yeah, I'm just kind of just hitting stuff. I'm the stuff that would get me fired from most of my gigs. Just like
Yes.
no timing, no finesse, no none of that. I'm getting the caveman out, so to speak.
Right.
And then once I do that, I feel like I can kind of focus. And what I like to do is, if it's something that I don't have to focus on mentally, if I'm not like learning something, if it's just like a repetitive kind of pattern, I'll put on the metronome. That's very important. I always have some sort of clip going. And you don't even really have to play with it all the time either. There are times when I'm right with it. I'm trying to make sure everything is exactly right where it needs to be. And then other times where I'll just kind of just go off of it, and this is kind of just there in the background.
All right, now that's
I,
this is an important subject because I remember when a church I was playing at first went to the click. We rejoiced and had a prayer meeting when we could go 12 bars without having to turn the click off. Because it was so difficult for so many people. And I've
right.
had people come up to me and says, "Well, I don't like to use a click because that just makes me a mechanical player." And I'm going, "No, it makes you a good. You got to know where the beat is." And what I had an old timer tell me once, he said, "Look, when you he called it burying the click. If you're playing on
Yes.
the click, directly on it, the click vanishes, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just not
Mm-hmm.
there because you're burying the click." He said, "Now, once you get to that point, he says, before you can get to the point where you're burying the click, it's like beat one is like goes by beep, beep, beat two, beat three." And he says, "But all of a sudden, when you're locked in solid, beat one is no longer this big. Beat one is this big. It just feels
Right.
huge." And he says,
Mm-hmm.
"Now, and that's the point where you can learn to play to the front of the beat or the back of the beat. And you're still with the click, but you're just
Right.
pushing a bit or you're just pulling back, but you're not dragging, you're not rushing, you're
No.
playing to the front, you're playing to the back.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't do that
Everything.
until you can bury the click."
Right. Everything is we talk about timing and pocket and all that kind of stuff, and there's so many different examples of that. Um, Even with drummers that don't have the best timing. For one of my favorite drummers of all time is a drummer named Stuart Copeland from the Police. He's one of my probably top 5 biggest influences, and he's known for not having good time. Like you listen back to early Police recordings, and he takes off like a rocket ship. And honestly, I think that probably had a lot to do with why him and Sting always fought each other. Is because Sting's up there trying to play bass and sing all these melodies, and Stuart Copeland's speeding up through the whole thing. So I can understand maybe that being kind of a part of why they had such a clash. But timing, pocket, all that stuff, it helps with the feel. Timing helps with the pocket and all that. You can have a good pocket and not have good timing. Case in point, Stuart Copeland. Also, you can manipulate the time a little bit more if you know what you're
Oh,
doing.
Buddy Rich
Tony
is a great
Williams,
example of that too.
Buddy Rich is
Because
a great example.
he played to the front all the time. He was
Yep.
constantly pushing, pushing, pushing.
But that was his personality though, and you can tell his personality came out in his drums, the way that he tuned his drums, the sort of sounds that he used. He used the very for a jazz drummer, he used the A Zildjian cymbals, which were on the brighter end of the spectrum. And then from there too, he used like really bright ping rides, and you don't really do that a lot in jazz. In jazz, you're more about it's more about blending with the band, and not so much about being in front. But that was just his personality, and
Well, he
everyone
was
talks about the
aggressive
Buddy Rich
and
bus tapes, and
the band was all about him. I mean,
right,
honestly,
right,
you went to hear the band, but you came to watch Buddy. I
exactly.
mean,
And if you listen back to his recordings too, like the actual albums, there's probably only like really only like 2 or 3 songs per album where he actually solos, and there's really only like one big solo. But like, I
mhm.
mean, he was known for being a drum soloist. But if you went and saw the band, you only saw a couple of solos here and there. You were watching him play with the band the whole time.
Oh, his big
And
band charts
so
were absolutely phenomenal. Oh yeah.
incredible. I mean, he had some great arrangers and I mean some amazing players on that Mercy Mercy record. He had Al Pepper was his lead alto player, and Al Pepper made a big name for himself in California, more on the cool jazz circuit. My teacher Bill Prince was there in that band.
My
People that
favorite song of his was Love for Sale. And
yeah, oh yeah,
I had the biggest nightmare experience in my life of playing a big band in Navy Band San Francisco. We pulled up Love for Sale, and but it's really fast. And I'm sitting there, and I'm just like, holy crap! It's like eight
yeah,
sheets of music, and there's not even a single rest. It's just walking this bass. And the drummer stopped. Dale Vanderpool, I remember it to this day. He had drumsticks like oak branches. This guy was huge. His sticks were huge, and he
right.
said, "What's your name, son?" I said, "Garwood." He said, "All right, hey Garwood, you drop another beat like you just did back there, I'm going to shove this drumstick so far up your backside, you're going to be spitting splinters." Do we understand each other? And I'm like a 19-year-old kid, and I'm almost, my eyes are brimming with tears. I'm scared to spit in death. And but that was my introduction to Buddy Rich, was Love for Sale at about 220 beats a minute or whatever.
Great chart.
It's a frightening chart.
that shout chorus there at the end, after all the solos and the bridge part and all that, like that very, very last shout chorus. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a better arrangement anywhere ever of another
now,
song.
who was the singer that did that with them? It's called the Velvet Fog, was his nickname. He hated it.
Mel Torme.
Mel Torme.
Mel Torme.
Did you see the video? Have you seen the video of Mel Torme doing that song with him?
Well, not with them.
Buddy Rich is starting off, and he says, and Mel Torme, who also was a fine jazz drummer, he stopped and says, "Hey, buddy, you play drums, right?" It was hilarious. He said, "This is the tempo I want right here, buddy." And of course, Buddy started messing with him, right? Buddy started way too fast, and Buddy started way too slow. And but they loved each other, and they worked together so well. But that chart, oh my word, it was.
And what's funny is the story that I heard about Mel Torme too is that he was all in on being a drummer until he heard Buddy, and then quit playing drums and then went to be a singer. Which there's a lesson in that too. There's a lesson in that. I personally, I mean, I've never met somebody with the talent of a Buddy Rich. Obviously, that's a once in a millennium sort of thing. But I've been very intimidated by people before that are just better players than me and still are better players than me. And it's really difficult to not sort of let yourself fall down that hole of being I'm not going to be as good as this guy, so I may as well just give it up, but
you're
had
a teacher,
he have not done that.
You're a drum teacher also, right? That's one of the things you do?
Yep.
You give lessons? All right. How do you deal with the student who's continually comparing themselves unfavorably with somebody else? Like, oh, I can never be as good as that guy or that gal.
I honestly don't run into a lot of that. Most of my students right now are younger, and most of them are in it as just kind of like an extracurricular activity. Right. They're not really too serious about it yet, mainly because they're not at that age,
Right.
Most of the time too, like with male and female students, I see female students maturing a lot faster than males do.
Oh my best students are my girl students. I mean, much to the chagrin of my boy students.
Yeah, they practice. They don't talk back to me a lot in lessons. They're very cordial, and all of my students are very respectful. I don't deal with that. But what I do is I tell them right off the bat, look, you're not ever going to be better than me or anybody else. But what you're going to be is you're going to be better than you were yesterday. And you're going to be the best version of you that you can be, and I don't mean you're not going to be better than me from an ego standpoint. I have lots to learn, and I always will. But I've come first. I've learned this. I'm teaching you everything that I know. You then have to take what I know and do that better. But if you're going to try to play like me, first of all, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't ever try to play like anybody else. But it comes with maturity, I think. And I just try to remind my students that, this is a lifelong journey. And that's one of the best pieces of information I ever got from Bill Prince. Bill Prince, when he auditioned for Buddy Rich's band, he was offered either the second trumpet part, which is the solo trumpet part in a big band, or the lead tenor position. They were like, you could take one or the other, and he chose the
Wow.
trumpet position. So this dude plays everything except, I mean, he can play drums. But when he does his recordings, his solo recordings, he hires a drummer. He hires mostly a guy named Ricky Kirkland down in Jacksonville. He used to play with Ray Charles back in the day. But I said, Dr. Prince, I'm here at, so I was like 18 at the time. And I said, I'm here at UNF. I'm in jazz studies. I'm trying to learn how to play the piano. I'm trying to learn how to play percussion, all this stuff. I don't feel like I have enough time to really devote to any of this. And he's like, well, what you have to remember is that music is a lifelong journey, and you're always going to be learning something. And it doesn't matter really where you are at this point, because you're not going to be there if you keep working. And that kind of
Oh, that's
started
nice.
the realignment of, where it's like, I don't have to be good at this right away. I won't be good at this right away. I've been playing drums since I was 11. So I guess about 20 years straight, pretty much. And I'm not anywhere near where I want to be now, but I'm a lot better than I was even 2, 3 years ago.
It's
So
funny. My
I try to
wife,
keep.
I was practicing like last year, I was practicing guitar, and my wife calls me other than the house. She says, honey, I said, yeah. How long have you been playing guitar? I said, oh, about 45, 46 years. Oh, shouldn't you be better? She can bust my chops like nobody's business. You
Dude,
know what
it's great.
I tell my students, the reason I brought it up because I teach a lot of guitar players, and of course, ego, man, we have to keep puncturing that balloon. But I keep telling my students, music is not a contest. It's not. It's a shared adventure. I said, I'm not the world's best bass player, guitar player, or anything. But I said, I'm good enough. My goal was to be good enough so I could get on stage with these folks and not shame myself. That was it.
Right,
I just
right,
wanted to be
right.
able to hang with the Charlie Corches. I wanted to be able to
Hmm.
hang with Marty Manus and all these blues players and these big time players around Atlanta, and be able to walk on, pull my instrument out of the stand and play without making an absolute turd out of myself. And
Absolutely. I think
I'm
I think
totally
that
okay with that.
that's most musicians that I know, that's their goal, is to just sort of be just there and present and playing what's needed at the time. Um, and so really with my students, I make it a point to not to not compare yourself to anybody else except for yourself. Really.
Hmm.
You want to be better than you were yesterday. Or even last week, if
That's
you're
the
trying
win.
to
That's the
go
win.
further back. And so there is competition in music. I would say that there is competition in music, but that competition is with yourself. It should
That's
never be
excellent.
with
Yeah.
anybody else.
I had
Nobody else is.
when I was getting my grad degree in composition, I had Diane Mosier was my professor for the semester, and they would hook you up with the professor, and you go up there for a week long residency, and then for the rest of that 6 months, you work with your professor over the internet to compose music and work with each other. She during one residency where she was my professor, she says, I got to ask you this question, and she had what I called a velvet glove technique. She would whack you hard, but she would do it in such a gentle way that it was like, please, ma'am, may I have another?
Right.
And but she asked me, she says, what is this obsession of yours with Palestrina? Because Palestrina, I love early Renaissance choral music. I said, I just love his music. And I went on and on and on about it. She said, um, sweetheart, she said, I don't know how to tell you this. You're never going to be Palestrina.
Hmm.
And then I waited for the other shoe to drop where she was really going to knock me down a peg or two. But she says, but you got to understand, Palestrina would have never been you.
Yep.
You have at your fingertips 500 more years of music to draw from than he did. And you will never be Palestrina, but he will never be you. And she says,
And
just be the best you that you can be. And that's all that anybody can ask.
it's very difficult to sort of to accept that. because for some reason I think we all think that the rules don't apply to us. Well, yeah, that works for that guy, but that's not going to be me.
Yeah.
But the more that you try to fight that, the more that you realize that you're just wasting your time and spinning your wheels. And the the more that you can compete with yourself. I have one student in particular right now who I've had for a long time. His brother started taking drums with me and then realized it wasn't really his place and kind of left it. And then this kid came to me when he was about 6 or 7 years old, and he's about 12 now, and he's doing like School of Rock, which here in Atlanta is like an extracurricular activity for kids that can get together with other kids of the same sort of talent level. And they can play some songs together, and they also have private teachers there as well. And he's playing a bunch of gigs with his school, and he's got it. He's been bitten by the bug, and it's really great to see his exuberance for it. He just eats it up, man. Like anything that I give him to do, he just tears it apart. But he's in that sort of stage right now where he's learning a lot. He's learning a lot more than he knew yesterday, and when we have recitals for the company I work for, he's talking about like how he's better than this, better than that. I'm like, okay, take a step back here a second, because what's going to happen is like what happened with me. I was voted most talented in my high school. I went to a school for the arts, so I had to fight my way up to that level too. When I got to college, I was now with 9 other drummers who were all voted most talented in their own high schools.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? So I went from being the big man on campus to being literally nobody in the span of a couple of months. And that can be very damaging to your ego. And I don't mean
you
just
told my story, because I was the big fish in the pond as a bass player.
Yep.
I get the Armed Forces School of Music. There were 5 bass players that I went through that school with, and of those 5 bass players, I was the 5th best bass player. And I've never been anything other than the best at anything. And I worked my butt off for that entire time for that School of Music. And through much determination and hard work, I finished up as the 5th best bass player. I never got out of the basement.
And when I was at UNF, there were 3 big bands that you could be a part of. The third being the least of them, and then the one being the top, obviously. And the third and second band, there were 2 drummers each in those bands, and then in the top band, it was only 1 drummer. He did everything, and then they would have a percussionist sometimes. The drummer that was in the top band when I was there at UNF, I was he was a friend of mine then. He has become a better friend of mine now, that we've been out of school. He worked harder, I think, than any other musician that I've ever known in my life, myself included. I mean, this kid put in 8 to 10 hours of practice a day. And he worked his rear end off, and he earned his spot into the top band. And at the time, I was a little bit jealous because I was a year older than him. I thought that I kind of deserved it over him at the time. And again, the ego thing kind of getting in the way of learning good lessons. Since I've graduated, I've been able to sort of understand what happens and why. And he earned his spot in that band, and there's nothing you can take away from that. You cannot substitute talent or any sort of natural talent with hard work. There is no substitute for that. And so that taught me a big lesson about just like, it doesn't matter how good I think I am. I still have a lot of work to do, and will always have a lot of work to do. And somebody who works more and works harder will ultimately be more successful, rather than somebody that kind of just, maybe puts a little bit of time in here and there, and really try to get more serious about what it is that you're doing, and me and this guy, he lives in New York. He's killing it right now up there, playing with everybody. We're great friends nowadays. He became a father, I guess about a year before me. So I'm now learning from him about like, how's it like being a musician with a child,
Right.
So if I were to come into that situation and bringing it back to my student too, who was comparing himself to my other students at this recital, where my student himself said that to me personally, not in front of anybody else, but he was like, well, it looks like I was the best kid here today. And I didn't say anything at the time. I was like, all right, cool, whatever. Because I didn't want to embarrass him in front of everybody. He was riding high because he did great. He sounded great. So he was riding high. When I came back to the next lesson, I said, I don't ever want to hear you say that to me or anybody else ever again, because I don't want you to ever compare yourself to anybody else. I don't care if you're the best sounding drummer here. No, not everybody thinks that. This is an opinion type of thing anyway, you know. I said, you need to be better than yourself. And if you're not better than
Yeah.
yourself next year, then you're not the best drummer here.
Hmm.
And that's one thing I can do. I can take my students down a peg or two if I have to, because I have been taken down a peg or two in my career as well from some of my all county band director, Frank Williams, trombone player who lives in Tampa. I think he's pretty much retired by now.
Right.
Meanest SOB I've ever worked with in my life. And I was scared to death to walk into that all county rehearsal because I knew he was just going to tear me apart no matter what I did. Um, and years later, I sent him a long message on Facebook thanking him profusely for being that person to really like, oh, you think you're good? No. Let me
You know
show
that,
you what good is.
you know,
You have no idea.
before we run this down, I I would like to hear you address. Is there all right? What is the big difference between a church gig in your mind, from your perspective as a drummer? What's the difference between church, secular, sacred gigs, church versus club gigs, playing in a worship band scenario as opposed to playing in like a club band or concert band, that kind of thing? Um, compare those two worlds.
Musically, there is no difference. There's no difference between playing a big band gig or playing a free jazz gig or playing a wedding gig or playing a church gig or even teaching a lesson, to be honest with you. The same rules apply. You know, it's the same
Notes
thing
or
where
no? It's
if
all about notes.
it's all about notes. It's all, well, from a drumming perspective, it's all about pocket and timing. No matter what style of music I'm playing, it is all about support and it is all about pocket and time. And now that changes based on what style you're playing, you know, the patterns you play, but
Right.
the concept does not change. The concept is always the same. And if you're a drummer or a bass player and you're not thinking that, then you're not thinking correctly, you know. And I'm not this person that likes to deal with a lot of black and white, especially with technique and drums. There's lots of ways of getting a good sound. So I'm never like, this way is the right way, this way is the wrong way. But if you're a drummer or a bass player and you're not thinking about how can I support this band and how can I make this band sound the best that I can, that's wrong. You think, change your way of thinking
All
entirely,
right,
because that is not going
you
to
just
help.
hit on something wildly. It's like my own little soapbox. I used to work with a drummer by the name of Cliff Davies. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He was Ted
I've
Nugent's
heard that
drummer
name.
back before
Yes,
you were born, I think. Back
probably.
when were you born? When's
I
your
was
birthday?
born in 1988, June
Oh
30th,
yeah, yeah.
1988.
You're just a kid. Okay, this is he was Ted Nugent's drummer, and he produced Grand Funk Railroad and the
Okay.
Who at some point. And
Oh, nice.
the
Okay.
most brilliant musician I've ever met. I think he had a doctorate in musicology. I mean, there was nothing about music this guy didn't understand. And
Right.
I was his go-to bass player before he passed away at his studio. He had a little studio in Hiram, Georgia, and he knew Paul McCartney on a first name basis. He says, "Yes, I know, Sir Paul," and he would drop that. But he said, and he always called everybody Love. He said, "Page Love." I went, "Cliff, this is Paulding County.
Right. 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 Right.
I'm
Right.
not
Right.
anybody's love."
Right.
All right, he says,
Right. Right.
"Yeah,
Right. Right.
yeah. All right then, Page Love. Here's what I want you to know." But he said when you're in a band, no matter what your context, what kind of band, what playing, he says, don't think like a bass player. Think like a record producer. He says, listen to what the drummer's doing. What can you do to help him? Think about what the singer's doing. Um, you think about yourself in the context of that playing situation, and then you would play accordingly. He says, don't think about your chops, don't think about your notes, don't think about what to do. And he had like a thing when I played jazz gigs with him as a drummer. I played rock gigs with him, pop gigs, and jazz gigs. I do go to a jazz gig. He'd say, Page Love, Page Love, you're the timekeeper. My kick drum is going to do whatever the beep it wants to do. You're
Right.
going to lay down, you're going to walk your bass, and I'm going to dance around you. Now, when we're playing pop or rock and roll, it's different. But
Right.
here, and he laid it out, and And I learned so much from that man, and he was absolutely one of the most brilliant musicians. But what you said about um, just it's it's about supporting whatever's happening at the moment. Is it a soloist?
Yep.
Get the crap out of the way. That's their
Hmm.
time, right? If
The
it's a singer, they need to feel so. I love it when a singer plays and floats with the tempo. That means he or she feels good about what you're doing. She knows where one is. There's no
right.
question. So he or she can push or pull, do whatever they want. Holiday, Lady Day, when she sing the blues,
Hmm. Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
it was never about it. She was telling a story,
Yep.
and she floated. The tempo just was so relaxed and floated.
Hmm.
Now the band was locked in tight, but she
Hmm.
floated over it. So I
That's
love that. I
that's the
love that
thing about it.
approach.
If you're looking at so the okay, so first of all, the very best compliment I could ever get as a drummer is the band sounded great. That's the
I
best
mean,
compliment I
yes,
can get.
that means you
That
did your job.
means that means I did my job. If somebody comes up and said you sounded great, then I failed that gig. Um, because I don't want to stand out. I want somebody. I want to be the subliminal message. I
Hmm.
want to be the arrow in the FedEx sign that you don't notice it's there, but it's there, right? I want
Right.
to be the reason why you love this band so much, but you don't realize that's the reason. That's always my goal. I don't know if I always achieve that. I'm sure if you ask 20 people I play with, you get 20 different answers. But my goal is always to be supportive and make the band sound as good as I possibly can. And so if I'm standing out, I'm not doing my job. I might not be mentally as prepared. I think part of the difference between a secular gig and a Christian gig is just the mindset of when you're around with other people. You want to be polite and you want to be understanding of the vibe, and kind of
Hmm.
read the room a little bit. I'm not going to talk about my favorite brand of whiskey, backstage at Burnt Hickory or whatnot. But I might
You
quote
could talk with
Ron.
me about that.
Okay, yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I kind of got into it over the quarantine of just not like drinking all the time, but got
Right.
more into the taste of whiskey. It's actually kind of nice, but
The thing that occurs to me about secular versus like when you're in a secular type thing, you're with a group of guys you're with all the time. So a student asked me once, "What's the hardest gig?" I said, "In many ways, it's the praise and worship world." He said, "Why? It's simple pop music." I said, "Yeah, but you know what? I don't have the same drummer every week. I don't have the same guitar players every week, and a lot of times, a lot of the musicians are they're amateur, and I don't
mhm,
mean that in a sarcastic way. I mean they're not as experienced.
right.
Church
No.
church music scene is a great place to gain experience, and I do not I don't look down on that at all.
Mm-mm.
I know how cool it must be able to sing in front of 500 or 600 people when you know that you would never get that shot with any band in Atlanta. So
Exactly.
there's experience that's gained. But I said the band is always changing, and
Hmm.
shoot, sometimes I'm playing guitar instead of bass. And so, yeah, what's the hardest gig in the world for me? Church, because
That's
you
a,
just don't
that
know what's going to happen.
that is a great point. That's a really, really great point. And I didn't really consider that too with the people that you work with, and the wedding band that I work in. I'm fortunate that I get to work with a lot of the same people a lot of times, but the way that it kind of works is it's more of like a collective of musicians that are, kind of put on gigs as they come up. And I'm fortunate enough to work with a lot of the same kind of people. So, I think personally too, for me, like a big thing about playing either secularly or in the church world is, can I vibe with you in some way?
Mhm.
One of my very best friends, the lead singer I work with a lot in my wedding band, him and I love Judd Apatow movies, like Super
Mhm.
Bad and all those raunchy movies from back in the day. So me and him just quote them all gig long, to the point of where we're like annoying people in our band. They're like, "You guys talk about anything else? Like, can you guys watch a different movie or something? You know, can you read a book and talk about that?" And like to us, that's more important than a lot of the music sometimes, you know, because it's like you come to work, you want to have fun, you know, like if I'm not having
Yeah.
fun with this, there's no point to it. But that's a really good point though about changing musicians, and it can be difficult too when you're not working with people that are on the same level, you know. And I use that as a distinction, like educated, right? If
Right.
you're saying that somebody's educated, that means that they've been to school. It's not that they're smart or dumb. It's
You
just
and I,
that's what
you
it
and
is, right?
I would consider you and I as ringers. All right,
Yes.
we're the experienced road warriors that come in, and we provide the foundation, which gives these other people who don't have the experience a pretty comfortable place, and it's a non-threatening place, generally
Right.
speaking. And now I've been in some churches, dude, where it has been a cat fight. Ugh.
Oh yeah.
But I will say, Burnt Hickory is really weird in that regard. That it's just a nice place to be. It's
And,
just a fun place to be.
ever since I've been there, I think I've been there what, a year and a half off and on. And everybody that I've worked with up to this point and beyond really has been just the most professional person that I could hope to work with, you know.
We got some
Um,
we have some high level players in that
yeah,
place.
very much so. I mean, Jimmy's a great singer.
Mhm.
I love the way Jason plays, and when he calls stuff out, and you're always right there where I need you to be. You know, and it's challenging in its own way because you're working with people that don't always play in a band situation. You know, you're working with people that might kind of play by themselves a little more often, or maybe they're more on the teaching side of things more so than the playing
Right.
side. I was a player before I was a teacher, so I have a lot of experience in that regard. And
Yep.
what and
Same
like
here.
what I bring to my students is what a professional musician would need on a gig, not necessarily, you know, nowadays, like I'm sure it's the same for every instrument, but you get all these YouTube guys, you know, playing drums in their basement that are playing all these like crazy 13/8 things and all this stuff. It's like, man, that is so unmusical, and you're never going to use that in a situation. You might
Oh,
use it one time.
I said, all right. The slapping thing on the bass. This is like another little soapbox of mine. I can do it, but I had a student of mine ask me. He says, "How often do you do that?" I said, "You know how many times I've been asked to do that in the studio over the last 40 years? That many times."
Yep.
And there's lots of
Not
reasons.
once.
It's a cool technique. It's
Mm-hmm.
a cool sound when the bass is by itself. But when you start folding the bass into the band, when you start doing the slapping and popping thing, I mean, it's a an EQ nightmare for the front of the house guy. But
Yes.
that in and of itself, it's like I'm I am so grateful that God has gifted us with this thing called music. And I've got a statistic that I quote all the time, and I have absolutely no basis in fact for it. But since you can't prove it's not right, there's a very good possibility it might be. But I believe that less than 10% of the people in the world can do what you and I do. We can make music happen. And
Mm-hmm.
when you're in a moment where you're playing a song, whether it's at a coffee house or a concert venue or in church, you're playing a song and you see people close their eyes and they're just like sucked into the song, sucked into that moment. Um, to me, there's no greater high on the face of the planet than that. When you
There's
really
not.
dig.
And you know, I think somebody, when they play their first gig, whenever that is, I think, you know, after your first gig. I know for me, after my first gig that I ever played, I knew that was what I was going to do for the rest of my
Yep.
life. And I think, you know, that the moment that you play, you know, you're like, all
Yep.
right, this is something that I want to feel again. It's all about feeling an emotion, you know, that's what music is.
It's like all of a sudden
And
you realize I'm going to be spending a lot of money on instruments in my future.
yeah. And I mean, for me, when I was a kid, it was a way for me to put my effort into something, you know.
Yeah.
It was a way for me to sort of channel my emotion if I was picked on, you know. Kids can be cruel,
Oh,
so it was a way for me to build up my
your
own
drums never
self-esteem.
talk back to you. Your drums
They
never called
don't
you names.
they don't hit you back either, you know. You can hit them as
That
loud
was
as hard as you
that
want,
was
they're
me
not
and
hit you
my
back.
guitar. I had a class once, and I'll close with this, and I'll get your final thoughts on something here in a second.
Okay.
I was teaching a music appreciation class once, and and they were just kind of like looking out the window, looking around, not paying attention. Middle school, right?
Yeah.
And I said, "Hey, can I ask you guys a question?" They said, "Sure." I said, "Raise your hand if you think it would be cool to play in front of 5,000 people who'd really dug what you did." And they raised their hand. I said, "I've done it." Raise your hand if you think it would be really, really cool to go to Nashville and play on a Nashville album and provide input to a song. I've done it. Um, Tell me if how cool it would be if you could write a song that somebody else would record. I've done it. How cool would it be if you were to travel overseas to a foreign country and play in front of 3,000 people in Gorky Park in Russia? How cool would that be? I said, I've done it. They said, Mr. Garwood, what's the point? I said, the point is that I have done what each and every one of you say you want to do. And all you see is an old fat white guy.
Right.
I said, I'm trying to tell you stuff that you're going to need to get you to there if that's where you want to go. But you
Absolutely.
just see the external, and you're I'm just an old fat white guy to you. But I've done everything you say you want to do. And
People too, like, like what I was talking about before, kind of hinting at it, is that they don't see the iceberg below the water.
oh,
What
that's a
they
good
see
analogy. Yes.
what they see is that little bit that sunk the Titanic. You know what I'm saying? They see what you have been working towards forever, for however long you've been
Hmm.
playing, and they don't see the sacrifice. They don't see the holes in my room growing up where I would throw my drumsticks across the room. We didn't have basements in
Oh,
Florida, so they were in my bedroom, and so I'd be playing stuff
yes.
that my teacher wanted me to play. I couldn't play it, and I get frustrated, and I'd throw my sticks across the room. And then when we sold my childhood home, my mom made me fix the wall. So I can fix dents in a wall really well. But they don't see all that. They don't see the sacrifice. They don't see ruined relationships because your significant other doesn't understand that you can't be with them at this point.
Oh,
You need to practice.
dude,
Um,
that is, I wish we had another hour to discuss that aspect of it because I'm married to a musician. Both of her parents are professors of music. She teaches piano, and she understands that when I was gigging professionally, I played on everybody else's holiday. My
right.
holidays, my weekend was Monday and Tuesday
Yep.
because Saturday, Sunday I'm working.
Hmm.
And um it's yeah, that's oh my gosh, that's another subject. Oh,
It's not an easy thing. Go ahead.
uh do you know who Adam Nitty is? Have you ever heard that name?
Yes, I have.
Okay, he's a bass player, hotshot bass player out of Nashville. He
Mhm.
used to live in the Metro Atlanta area, and I studied with him for about 6 to 8 months. And um, it's I know that I am not an aesthetically pleasing looking person. I'm, I'm in shape. Round is a perfectly good shape,
Hey,
right?
I'm right there with you, man.
And I'm not the rock star guy. I'm not the guy. I'm not the skinny jean wearing hipster when I'm playing and everything. I know all that stuff. I don't. When I walk down the street, nobody's ever going to mistake me for being a player.
sure,
But
right.
we were up in Nashville once with the school, and Adam Nitty happened to be around the area, and he came up to me, and this has been like 3 years after I'd studied with him, and he came up to me and he said, "Paige, how you doing, buddy?" I went, "Fine, Adam. How you doing?" And we chit chatted and everything. And as he was leaving, he turned to one of my students and said, "You need to listen to what this guy has to say. He's a
I love
player."
it. I
And
love it, man.
he walks away, and I'm going, "Yeah." But the cool thing is that Adam he gave me props, and
Yeah,
I'll never be. If I was in the comparison world, dude, he'd be the last person I'd want to chase after because I ain't never going to do what he does.
absolutely.
But he's a Christian and he's a gentleman, and he gave props to another bass player,
And
and that will stay with me the rest of my life.
that sort of respect thing too, I think, is something that you learn as you get older, and it just kind of more connected in the scene. And the more that you can sort of realize that your competition lies with yourself and not so much somebody else. And to that point, more so, it's kind of like always trying to attain more money. There's never an amount of money that's ever going to be enough. You're always going to need
Yeah.
more, right? And so if you're always looking at better players, there's always going to be a better player than you, always, no matter what, no matter who you are.
Yep. There's a local guitar heavyweight player. Name is Marty Manus. I don't know if you've heard of him. All right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Great friend. I used to teach alongside of him, and
Okay.
marvelous guitar player. Stevie Ray Vaughan clone. I mean, this guy can do it all. And,
He's legit. Yep.
And I remember when I first heard him, my attitude used to be, oh crap, man, I'll never be able to do that. And then I had an attitude shift, like what you've been talking about. And it's like, now when I hear him play, I'm going, wow, you can do that on a guitar? Whoa.
Yeah.
That's stinking
it's cool,
amazing.
man. It's really cool. And one of my favorite drummers are guys that I secretly kind of hate in a way because they're just so they're so talented, and they think of things to play that I would never think of, who I kind of credit for sort of keeping my head on straight is a local guy by the name of Darren Stanley. And he plays now with Perpetual Groove. They're a jam band. They were from Savannah, Georgia originally, but I think they're kind of more located here now. But during the quarantine in 2020, he would send me videos of stuff that he was doing, and he's like, he's like, I know you're not doing anything else right now. He's like, why are you not practicing? And I was like, because I'm depressed about this, and I'm upset about this. He's like, nobody cares about that, dude. Get down and work, man. You're never gonna have this time again. You will never have this time again where you can't do anything.
Yeah.
And so he was like, if you're not down there working, he's like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear about it. And so he kicked me in the behind, man, a lot. And I would send him stuff, and he'd be like, yeah, it's okay. It's not really that great. Keep going. And I'd play some stuff. And if I played something that sounded great, he'd be like, dude, that gave me goosebumps. That sounded really great. That was very, very few and far between. I have
a friend. His name is Mark Miller. In fact, I've already interviewed him. He's one of my other podcast guys. He's out of the Seattle area. And good Lord. I remember one time I was on a studio gig, and I fired myself in the studio gig because I couldn't have found the pocket. George Sandler was a drummer on this gig.
Okay, yeah.
All right, so another monster player, right?
Actually, so without George, I would not have been at Burt Hickory, because he was the one that recommended me for the gigs.
He was on the studio gig, and it was a Christian album, but I fired myself from it because I couldn't have found the pocket if I had a tin bucket with a lid, right? So I go home, and I am totally stinking depressed. And I call up Mark Miller in Seattle. Mark, this is Paige. Man, God, here's the deal. And I told him what had happened. I said, can you help me? And he said, well, yeah, but only if you're going to listen. Mm-hmm. And it was a very Mark is one of these guys. He got straight to the chase. He said, this is what I want you to do. And I don't want you to tell anybody else you're doing this. I want this to be for you. I said, okay, what? You're in a worship band, right? I said, yeah. All right, next Sunday at the worship band, I want you to go in, and I want you only to play the root of the chord on your bass. And then I only want you to play whatever the drummer's playing on his kick drum. That's it.
Right.
Whatever he plays in the kick drum, and you play the root of the chord. No happy hands thing, right? I said, okay. So I go in, and I do that this next Sunday. And then we always had a decompression time after church. You go to the green room, talk about the service, what worked, what didn't. And I walked in after service was over, and the whole room's abuzz. Everybody's saying, man, we were so tight today. I don't know what the difference was, but man, it was like a rock out there. And I'm in the back room going, I'm the reason we sucked for 2 years. but
it's a very sobering realization.
That's a community I'm part of. I've got these players, Charlie, you, Mark, Adam Nitty, Marty Manus, this community of believer players. There's a level of respect to, and even when correction is given, it's always given with respect. I mean,
absolutely.
There's a million things I don't know, and you're going to help me with it. And it doesn't mean I'm less of a player because we discovered that my timing sucked. We fixed it.
Yeah, not at all. Not at all. And that comes back to your ego and just how you think of yourself,
Yes.
And if you like, for me, where I start to kind of fall down that hole is where if I think I'm better than someone else, like such was the case at the time when I was at UNF, and my friend got the top band spot over me. Embarrassingly, and full disclosure time here, I felt that I was better prepared for the gig. I felt that I was the better choice. Obviously, the people that were auditioning us didn't feel that way. And now that I'm older, I can understand why I was not the better choice for that band. Probably because I thought I was the better choice for that band, and I think that kind of got in the way of me actually like working to that. Where I was like, well, I'm a senior, I put my time in, and I feel like I'm owed it. You're never owed anything. You're not
Oh
owed
my gosh.
anything.
Yes.
Anything ever within any way and anywhere. You earn your way. You earn you earn your talent. Nothing's ever been given to me in terms of working for things like that. And so I think like when you start to sort of separate yourself from that competition, that outward competition, and you take that outward competition and bring it more inward, and you're like, all right, well, what can I do to be better than myself a week ago or a month ago or even yesterday, and then a lot of that kind of stuff tends to go away, where it's like, well, there are a lot of great players that have a lot of great stuff over me, but I have this that I can work in there, and then I'm going to learn from these people too. The drumming community. I don't know what it's like with other instruments, but with drummers especially, I have never really dealt with a situation where there was like a really egotistical type of drummer.
Right.
Nobody that really like was into themselves. And all my gigs that I've gotten, like George Sandler recommended me for Burnt Hickory. My buddy Chris Burrows recommended me to sub for him at the what used to be the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Buckhead. And then when that gig ended for them, the singer from that band who I met subbing for Chris, she had her own gig at the Intercontinental Hotel in Buckhead for like a year. She hired me for that. And then from there, I did a recording session with that piano player. And so it just kind of stems off from there.
It's funny. It's funny that you mention that, because it's been my experience that the egotistical type players are the punks. And I mean that in almost that sense of that word. The young guys, the young guns. Mm-hmm. And it's like you reach a certain age, you realize, the fact that I can play 30-second note triplets at 220 beats a minute doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because that's not music.
Can I play the pocket? Can I make it so that you can do whatever you want to do? And am I part of the family that's that band? And it's a family relationship.
I ask my students this all the time, and I get so many different answers. What is the most important part of a song? The most important thing that needs to stand out. What is it?
All right, for me, as a songwriter and a composer, everything supports melody, because that's the part of the song that that's the part of the song that people relate to.
That's the correct answer. There is no other correct answer than that. It's the melody.
A tale as old as time. The minute somebody starts singing that,
yep, you know exactly what
everything,
it is.
Everything is a support to that.
My goal is not to be a standout drummer. My goal is to be in standout bands and make sure that the people that I'm working with can feel supported and feel that I'm a team player and that I come to work prepared, that I know the songs, that I'm on time relatively. I feel like there's a good like 10 or 15 minute window between being professional and unprofessional. As long as you're set up ready to go by downbeat, that's on time. Things happen. I'm not gonna, when I'm in charge of a gig, I'm not sitting there with the stopwatch. Oh, you're a minute late. It's not like that. Like if you're set up ready to go by the time, then you're good to go. But just making everybody feel comfortable. And right. I think that's also the kind of the difference between more of the ego and being confident. For me, I'm very confident in that I can play to a click. I can follow a form, and I know how to play basic beats. So at the very least, that is what I'm going to bring to the table. I'm going to support everybody else that knows what they're doing more than me. I think especially at Burnt Hickory, there are people that work at Burnt Hickory a lot more often than we do. And they know the songs a little bit better. I put in, at least 3 or 4 days a week with whatever songs I have to learn for that week to learn them. especially because I'm not as up on the secular or the Christian songbook, so to speak. You know, when you're playing in a top 40 band or a jazz band, there's a standard book. You know, you're in a
Right.
top 40 band, you're going to play Superstition. You're going to play um, um,
Be still my beating heart.
that. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
going to play you're the random songs. You know,
Right.
what's that Van Morrison song that everyone plays? Brown Eyed Girl. You know,
Yeah.
so like when those songs are on the list, I don't have to listen to those songs. I'll play those songs a million times. But when there's songs on there that I'm playing for Burnt Hickory that I don't know as well, I'm listening for the form, but I'm also listening to the click. I'm listening to the track. I'm making sure that everybody, the pianist, you, the guitar player, Jimmy, whoever's singing lead vocal at the time, knows what's going on, knows where the downbeat is. You know, that everybody just kind of knows what's happening, because the very worst thing you can do is get this kind of look, and you know the look I'm talking about, where they're like,
I'd like to say I don't know that look, but yeah, I know that look.
you sure that you showed up at the right gig today? You know, and that's not a good feeling. You don't want to feel that
No.
way. You know, what you do want
You
to
know,
feel is good. You know,
a band leader told me once, he says, and he's speaking to me as a bass player, he says, make me ask you for more. If you make me ask you for less, you're not coming back to the next one.
yep, that's exactly right. And
Hey, this is a good place to shut down, because we've been at
okay,
this for an hour and we could go another hour. I know
I
that.
would love to.
I'd love to do more. But before we leave, I'm going to put out, what's your contact information? If somebody wants to get a hold of you for a gig or for lessons, how do we get a hold of you?
I'm on Facebook and Instagram. You can just search my name, Nico Lembo. Also, I have a website, which is nicolembomusic.com.
NicoLembomusic.com. All right.
Yep. I have some recordings of myself, some videos on YouTube, and I write a blog occasionally. I haven't written for a while. I actually need to get back on that again, but I'm still trying to figure out what my life's like now with a child. So it's been quite an adjustment the last 8 or so months.
And where do you
So
teach? Where do you teach at?
I teach at Music and Arts in Johns Creek on Sundays and Mondays, and then I teach in-home lessons through a company called Flying Fingers the rest of the week.
Flying Fingers.
Yes,
I want to be a fly in the wall when people come up with these names.
me too. I've been working.
I wanted to be in the meeting where they said, you know what? I think our band's name should be Bare Naked Ladies.
Right. Yeah.
Where does that come from?
Both places that I teach, Music and Arts is a national chain. Flying Fingers is a small business, and I've been working with Flying Fingers almost 10 years now.
Cool.
And I've had some students about that long too. So it's a great, small business to work for. The owner, I teach the owner's kids how to play drums, and it's really a rewarding thing to watch children, especially kids, be able to do things that they couldn't do a month ago, and it gives them a sense of accomplishment, and it kind of gives them a sense of being. When I was a kid, if I didn't have this to sort of fall back on, I don't know what I would have done.
Music saved me.
It
Music
saved my life,
me.
man. It's given me a reason to keep going. So, thank you for having me on today, Paige. I really appreciate you spending the time with me and just being interested in what I have to say.
We will do this again. That would be awesome.
I would love to. Anytime. Let me know.
All right. Appreciate you, my friend. Be good.
Yes, sir. You too. I'm sure I'll see you soon.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Take care.